Good afternoon, and welcome back to another season of programs from the Marin Coalition. Sorry for the short delay in getting this program started, but here we are. I'm Scott Pinsky, chair of the Marin Coalition, and on behalf of the entire board, we're pleased to have you join us for another year of conversations that matter. And this is our first program in our new season. You might have noticed that there's no silverware or bread and butter in front of you, so you've probably already figured out that we're still coming to you via Zoom. We did an audience survey over the summer, and the majority of you responded that you were still concerned enough with health issues that you prefer to see our programs virtually and would prefer to wait before we go back to live programs. And so we accordingly made the decision to continue to present our programs online, at least through the end of 2021. And like most organizations, we're taking the situation one day at a time, and we'll continue to reevaluate how best to proceed with our programs. Obviously, we want to get back to in-person events as fast as anybody else wants to, but we need to be cautious of the health situation, obviously. So we'll take all of that into account and keep you posted. We'll continue to solicit your views as our audience as to when and how you are prepared to return to in-person events as we progress through these unprecedented times. And we thank you for your patience and for continuing to tune in to hear our speakers in whatever way we can bring them to you, which we will continue to do. As a reminder, Marin Coalition is an all-volunteer nonprofit public affairs forum based here in Marin County. We welcome all viewers, and we invite you to become a member by visiting our website, marincoalition.org. Since the start of the pandemic, we've made the decision to bring these public affairs programs to you free of charge. Anyone can sign in and attend at no cost. We're therefore continuing this free access this season. And in this way, we hope that our online platform enables us to reach even more viewers. At the same time, our organization faces ongoing expenses, which we rely on our donors to help offset. And so we encourage you to consider a tax-deductible donation to help us continue the work that we've been doing here in the community for almost 50 years. You can donate to us by going to our website. Let me tell you about our next event on October 20, again at noon, again on Zoom. We will be presenting two leaders from the recently established Marin Wildlife Prevention Authority. Bruce Goins, the president of the board, and Mark Brown, the executive director of the authority, will be our guests to give us an update on the rollout of this new agency, which in our current times is one of the more important governmental agencies that I think we should all be keeping track of. So I'm looking forward to that report as a member of the Firewise community myself, and look forward to hearing those two guests tell us about the rollout of their new organization. Last technical note before we begin, as you're probably accustomed to by now, please send in your questions for today's panel by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will see your questions and read them to our panel to get their response, and we'll try and get in as many questions today as we can. Today's program is an update on a topic that we've attempted to stay abreast of over the years, namely coping with homelessness in Marin. In 2018, we gave a program entitled New Approaches to Homelessness in Marin, where we invited a panel of representatives from the county, local cities, and nonprofit groups to discuss the challenges, strategies, and opportunities to address this important issue. Much has happened over the last 3 years. And so our first program for the 2021 season, 2021-22 season, will revisit this issue with the perspectives that 2 years of COVID-19 brings. Today, we're featuring 5 experts. Some of them are coming to us a second time to discuss the status of homelessness, how and why the situation has changed over the last few years, how the situation is being managed, and opportunities for improving the circumstances of those who are homeless. We're extremely pleased to welcome our panel for today's presentation, and not in order, Ashley Hart McIntyre. She has been the homelessness policy analyst with Marin County Health and Human Services since 2015, where she makes recommendations to the county on the best ways to address homelessness in Marin. She oversees implementation of evidence-based practices and manages numerous interagency collaborations. Lynn Murphy is the mental health liaison for the San Rafael Police Department. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's been with the department for 8 years. Her job is to engage with individuals who are experiencing homelessness and or mental illness to connect them with whatever services they need. Andrew Henning has been working to end homelessness in the Bay Area for the last 12 years. From Silicon Valley to San Francisco to the North Bay, he has provided frontline research outreach in some of our nation's largest homeless encampments, managed a growing workforce, and served in an executive leadership role in local government. He's currently the project director with Opening Doors Marin, a public-private partnership working to create more permanent and supportive housing in Marin County. Katie Spence has been a licensed marriage and family therapist since 1995. She's worked for more than 25 years designing and operating mental health and residential treatment programs in Marin and the Bay Area to deliver specialty mental health services to those who are homeless, severely mentally ill, and substance using individuals. She leads the St. Vincent de Paul homeless outreach team that secures supportive housing for people experiencing chronic homelessness. And last but not least, Paul Fordham has served as Deputy Executive Director of Homeward Bound since 2010. He's involved in fundraising, social enterprise, business development, program oversight, and strategic planning. Previously, he worked in homeless services for Loaves and Fishes in Sacramento and the Julian House Shelter in England. Our first presenter, who will walk us through the remainder of the program, is Andrew Henning, Project Director and with Opening Doors Marin, and I will now turn it over to you. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. I will go ahead and get my screen shared here. So just bear with me for a second. And let's get the presentation going. So perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Andrew Henning with Opening Doors Marin, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I was telling my other panelists, I think we might actually have the most comprehensive homelessness presentation that we've ever done. So hopefully we'll be able to answer or preempt any questions that you might have about what's going on around homelessness in Marin. In order to really understand what's happening today, it is important that we actually look back a few years, and specifically going back 5 years to 2016. Back at that time, for a lot of different reasons, which we can go into during the Q&A, we gradually, as a social service system, came to the conclusion that there was this key insight, this kind of core problem that was really affecting the community and that we really needed to tackle. And it was this insight that even though there are a lot of different people experiencing homelessness for a lot of different reasons, most of our quote unquote challenges with homelessness were really stemming from a small group of people experiencing what's called chronic homelessness. And chronic homelessness is long-term homelessness of at least a year, accompanied by some kind of disabling condition, like a physical health issue, a mental health issue, substance abuse disorder, or a traumatic brain injury. And oftentimes it's multiple of these conditions at the same time. And so what we began to find is that if you look at people from folks that are temporarily homeless for a few weeks, a few months, which is actually the bulk of people that become homeless, to people that are long-term chronically homeless, in terms of public cost, the cost rises exponentially for people that are chronically homeless. Back at that time, there was a study of people that were long-term chronically homeless and also had long-term engagement with the criminal justice system, as well as drug and alcohol issues. And it found that those folks were costing our community on average $60,000 per year per person to be unhoused. Whereas we found over time through other interventions that the cost of actually housing and serving these folks is less than half of that. So that was a big part. And then I think also was just the ethics of it, the morality of why we all do this work, which is that these are some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Again, studies have found, and it's been our observation as well, that people experiencing chronic homelessness pass away on average 20 to 25 years earlier than their housed peers, not from single nights of cold, though that doesn't help, but instead from long-term chronic health issues that go unaddressed while people are living on the street. So for those two reasons, we began to feel like we really need to do something about chronic homelessness. And we began to realize that in our community, and this is the case in communities all across the country, most of our historical programming had been really focused on this part of the curve, the temporary and episodic. And we really needed to understand, how do communities tackle chronic homelessness? So we got in our cars and we tried to convene the team, and we went on field trips throughout the region. We went up to Sonoma, to the East Bay, to the Peninsula, Santa Clara County, all over, trying to understand what are other communities doing to address chronic homelessness. We took our elected leaders, we took our providers, and we tried to learn as much as we could. And at the same time that we were doing this, we began to try to map the experience of people that were chronically homeless in our community. The details of this map are less important than the kind of conceptual idea of what's going on, where homelessness is denoted here in the center and housing is out on the outer part of the circle. And so you can see this jumbled web of trying to get people from being unsheltered on the street into our housing programs. And so what we realized is that there was this vicious feedback loop at play. You had people that were inherently difficult or challenging to serve because of those underlying vulnerabilities, those health issues. Our programs were not set up at that time to really be able to accommodate those folks well. Because of that, those folks would not have success in our programs and return to the street. That led to more distrust of the system. And so people didn't want to seek help, and thus their situation got worse. And when we first started this push around chronic homelessness, there were people who had been homeless in Marin for 20, 30, even 40 years, locked into this vicious cycle. And so that really became our calling of what are we trying to change? And so what we realized in visiting all those other communities is that we didn't need another mental health program per se, or another drug and alcohol program. We needed a new process and a new approach to recognizing the unique needs of all these different individuals. So one thing that we learned when we were in San Mateo was there was this case conferencing strategy called the Homeless Outreach Team, whereby every service provider in the community, plus the local jurisdictions, the city, the county, came together around a table every 2 weeks to triage the needs of the most vulnerable people. And so in 2016, that's really where the story begins. We launched our own version of the Homeless Outreach Team focused on homelessness in downtown San Rafael. And we met every 2 weeks, focused on, again, about the dozen or so most vulnerable chronically homeless people in San Rafael. We can then combine that with another strategy that we learned about called Housing First, which basically, if you remember the kind of maze of services a minute ago, is the exact opposite of that. Rather than having people navigate those services and try to manage homelessness, Housing First is about taking people directly from the street, placing them into housing with wraparound support services. And that ends up being 100 to 200% more effective than the status quo. And this has now been confirmed by UCSF clinical studies, double-blind studies that show that Housing First is more effective for people that are chronically homeless than just waiting for them to resolve their homelessness on their own. As a result, fortunately, our kind of thesis, our hypothesis paid off. And over the first 18 months of the pilot, we housed 23 of the most visible, vulnerable, chronically homeless people in San Rafael. And this is one of the gentlemen here that we worked with. So based on those early results in 2017, and to be exact, October 1st of 2017, so almost 4 years ago, we decided that we wanted to make this strategy in San Rafael, this pilot program, our county-wide strategy. And fortunately, at that time, we started to learn about a movement, a national movement, and actually it's international. It's people in the United States and Canada, but it's called Built for Zero. And it's communities from, here in the Bay Area to the Mississippi Gulf, to Denver, to parts of New England that are all using this, what we call the by name list approach to really prioritizing care for people that are chronically homeless, as well as actually veterans. And so because of Built for Zero, we now know that communities, if they really invest in this type of homelessness, they can dramatically, measurably reduce chronic and veteran homelessness. And there are now communities in the United States that have ended chronic homelessness, ended veteran homelessness. And that is something that we're also committing to trying to do as well here in Marin. So in terms of the impact, again, we're almost 4 years at our 4-year anniversary of starting this new countywide strategy and looking specifically at chronic homelessness in the last 3 months. This is our housing rate the past 3 months. So in June, we housed 11 chronically homeless folks, July 13, August 16. These are honestly some of our best housing placement months ever. We're really on a roll right now, and we'll talk about why that is coming up. But as you can see, we're getting very close to passing the 400th person housed mark. So this is just a phenomenal accomplishment that we really honestly could not have imagined a few years ago. And just to briefly say, of all these people we've housed, of those 389 folks, 95% of them are still housed. And at least based on a preliminary study a few years ago in San Rafael that was looking specifically at people that had been homeless in San Rafael, we've seen dramatic reductions in criminal justice utilization as well as healthcare emergency service utilization. So again, this is really a much more effective way to help people, both economically, morally, you name it. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Paul Fordham, because the question that we always get next is, how did you do it? How did you house all these folks? So for that answer, I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Andrew. And so if we advance on to the next slide, I think one thing I can say is that there's multiple strategies we've used to create, to house people. So one, obviously we build some, we'll get to that in a moment, but one really successful strategy was to pair Section 8 vouchers, which provide a subsidy, with wraparound support services. So a number of folks are placed into housing in the community, and then they have a case manager who visits with them frequently, usually at least once a week, can ramp up if someone needs additional support, or can scale back if they stabilize. And we do see a lot of people really stabilize in housing and then are able to slowly re-enter the workforce or start volunteering in their community, and really the life starts normalizing in those times, so they need less of our wraparound support. But that has been a really, really successful strategy, and a huge shout out to the Marin Housing Authority, who's been with us during this journey and learned with us. And Andrew referenced the Built for Zero community, so there's a nationwide initiative to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And we learned very early on that some of the most successful communities had this partnership between the Housing Authority, who administer Section 8 vouchers, and wraparound supports. And the Marin Housing Authority said, yes, let's try that and see if it works. And as Andrew demonstrated, it's been really successful. So one way that we've housed so many people is to pair vouchers, to rent available units in our community, and to provide wraparound supports to help people maintain that housing as long as they need those supports. If you could advance the next one, Andrew. So another way is that we've partnered with affordable housing developers who are building affordable housing in our community, and to carve out a number of units within those developments for people experiencing chronic homelessness, and again, then provide supports. So this is Victory Village in Fairfax. It's operated by RCD, which are Resources for Community Development, and a subset of the units there were provided for folks who are chronically homeless, and then they're placed into those units. And again, they still get the support services provided by our community providers. So we've used vouchers to utilize existing units, but we've also built new units to house people experiencing homelessness. And then a third way, if we flip to the next slide, is that we've built and we're building new units that are not built by affordable housing developers. They're built by local, or sometimes by affordable housing developers, sometimes by local nonprofits, that are specifically 100% designated to chronically homeless adults. So this one is Mill Street 2.0. This is in San Rafael. What you see here is the existing the previous homeless shelter that existed on this site. Right now it's been leveled and it's being rebuilt as a homeless shelter, but with 2 new floors of affordable housing above it. So there will be 32 additional units to add. This is sort of to come in the future. Over this past few years, though, we have Homeward Bound has developed King Street Senior Housing, which is in Larkspur. It was a former convent and had been underutilized. In fact, no one had been there for 8 years, and we're able to renovate it and make it an affordable rental program for 12 homeless seniors. So they came out of from the streets and from the homeless shelters and moved into this former convent in Larkspur, and everybody has stayed housed in there too. So 3 ways: 1, rental subsidies for units in the community, partnering with affordable developers to make sure that any affordable housing development has some units set aside for homeless adults, and then building new projects that are 100% dedicated to chronically homeless folks. And we've, as Andrew said, it's hugely successful. As people have housing, they're not worried about, where am I going to sleep tonight? How am I going to eat? Am I going to get moved on? Is it going to rain while I'm sleeping in the park? How do I just change my awful situation? I didn't sleep well outside. I was worried about being attacked, people stealing my stuff. That was the experience previously of people who were homeless for a long time. Now they suddenly have a roof. They know where they're going to stay. They're housed. They feel like a human again. Their behavior patterns often start to change as people are not trying to escape their current situation. They wake up in safety and they're able to return to what we would, house folks do in our daily routines. People are sleeping in, showering, finding productive sense of self in the world, returning to work, returning to community. And so we've seen a huge amount of success. I will add just a couple of things about Homeward here, and then I'll move on to the more visible homelessness you're seeing on the streets, despite all our success. But Homeward Bound in general, we have 5 shelter programs. We work with homeless adults, homeless families, veterans, seniors. And so we have 5 related shelter programs, and we have 12 related supportive housing programs. And we are really focused on building more housing programs, not more shelter, because we found, the system, as Andrew demonstrated before, was people cycling in and out of shelter. Shelter is not housing. It's just a place to be for a night. Housing is somewhere where you have a lease. So we know the solution is more housing, and it can be infill development housing. It can be using existing developments, but we need to create more housing. So in addition to the one you see on the screen, Mill Street 2.0, which will be a renovated shelter with 32 units, we're partnering in Corte Madera to work on one development there. We're looking in Novato and adding a veterans and workforce housing development, because we need to keep providing the housing solutions. That's how homelessness is really simple. It's in the name. People don't have a home. If we can get them a home, they're no longer homeless. And we have the proof that it's more cost effective to do that, to serve people when they're in housing. And also it changes people's lives entirely. We see it time and time again. The amount of times people say to us, "You saved my life." Like, no, we didn't. We provided a place for you to be, and you changed your behaviors, but it's that having a safe place to be that helps people really transform their lives. So with all this success, and we really have seen the system change in Marin over the last 4 or 5 years, nearly 400 people we've housed who are chronically homeless with this collective effort. So despite all this progress, you've probably noticed more visible homelessness on the streets. And so to talk about that, I'm going to turn it back to Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. And I think, Paul said it well. I think that's what's really difficult about this moment, is that on one hand, we were having, some of the best housing placement rates we've ever had. There are new resources that are coming online, which again, we'll talk about. But in a lot of ways, I think for the public, homelessness might look like it's worse than ever. And so we wanted to at least acknowledge that and describe some of the factors that are driving that. And I think the biggest factor is really, or at least the biggest way people are noticing this, is around the encampments. So there's been a big encampment, or there was a big encampment in Sausalito at Dunphy Park. There was a large encampment underneath the 101 Viaduct in San Rafael. There was also a big encampment next to the Novato Library and Lee Gerner Park. And so the question is, why have these encampments gotten so large? What has changed that's making these encampments so large? And it's, again, a complicated, multifaceted issue. So the first, and this began even pre-COVID, is the legal environment for unsheltered homelessness is beginning to change. And so I think it was 2017, it was around that time, maybe even earlier, there was a group of homeless folks in Boise, Idaho, who were sleeping in a public park. And those individuals were cited for sleeping outside in a public space. And they basically sued the city and said, this is a violation of the Bill of Rights. This is cruel and unusual punishment. We have nowhere else to go. There's not enough shelter space. So how can we get in trouble for sleeping outside? And so that case ultimately made its way up to the Ninth Circuit. And then the Ninth Circuit ruled in favor of those individuals. And then that was appealed up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of the Ninth. Well, they basically did not hear the case. So they essentially upheld that earlier precedent. So that has created a different environment for how local cities and towns and communities are able to respond to unsheltered homelessness. And in a community like, not even a community, a state like California, where only about 30% of folks have access to emergency shelter, that creates a real challenge. And I think what's really hard, as Paul said, is that we know the solution to homelessness is more housing, and we've been really trying to invest in more permanent housing. And so it creates a difficult situation where on one hand, we are housing a lot of people, and yet there is still folks that are unfortunately unsheltered in our community. So, that's part of it. The next was the pandemic itself. And a big factor here was that early in the pandemic, the CDC, as all of us were trying to learn and understand what COVID really was and the impact of it, was extremely worried about the vulnerability of people that were experiencing homelessness for all the reasons I just talked about. Folks are passing away 20 years earlier than their house peers because they have these underlying health vulnerabilities. So the guidance from the CDC was that communities should try to not do any kind of enforcement around encampments, because on one hand, breaking up an encampment, if there was, let's say, an infection in an encampment, that could lead to community spread of the virus. But again, we were also finding people in a very isolated and difficult place. And so that was an opportunity for them to have some kind of community and a way for outreach workers to get to them to provide services. Kind of marrying those first two things together, over the course of the pandemic, as communities tried to resume some kind of enforcement around encampments, there were rulings that basically said communities need to be mindful of that public health guidance. And so under the public health guidance, there were injunctions against, again, any enforcement action against encampments. So those are three big reasons. Number four, and again, the details of this are less important than kind of what it's symbolizing. This is a graphic from the city of San Rafael, basically showing that, within San Rafael, there are multiple government agencies at play. There's the city, there's JPAs, there's the county, there's the state, there's Marin Sanitary. And so all these different agencies are not always operating in the same way. And so for particular encampments, such as the 101 Viaduct, that creates a real challenge. And so, over the course of the pandemic, that encampment grew and grew and grew, and it required coordination from the city, from the county, from Caltrans, from the state, to try to really understand what is possible and how can we serve these folks. And I think what's important to note is that, these encampments have real impacts. From year to year, kind of the height of the 101 Viaduct encampment, there was a nearly doubling of police calls for service to that area. And there was also a nearly doubling of fire calls for service to that area. So again, these are really vulnerable folks. And at the same time, that was having a major impact in the community. So fortunately, over the past, 18 months at this point, but really the past few months, there's been some major commitments in our community towards addressing unsheltered homelessness. And I do want to just say real quick that even though encampments are so visible, and, having worked for the city of San Rafael for almost 5 years, I recognize that for a lot of community members, this might be the only interaction with the issue of homelessness, driving by an encampment. And so it can feel like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Homelessness has gotten out of control. But at least based on the last data that we had, or the best data that we had, tent encampments or unsheltered homelessness that manifests as unsheltered homelessness that emerges as encampments remains about 15% of the overall homeless community. So it still is quite small relative to the overall need, but it is so visible. The other important thing is that, and what we found in San Rafael, and I'll let Lynn talk about this, is that the vast majority of these folks are chronically homeless. So as we continue to execute on our chronic homeless strategy, we can continue to make progress on encampments. And so for the duration of this presentation, you're going to hear some of the major ways that we are responding to that. Lynn's going to talk about some of the immediate things that are happening to help connect services to folks that are unsheltered. And then Katie and Ashley are going to talk about the new services that are being rolled out for folks, and then some of the new housing initiatives that we have to try to create even more units. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Lynn to talk about some creative new ideas from the city of San Rafael.
Thank you, Andrew. So if you live in San Rafael, or if you pass through San Rafael, it's quite likely that you at some point saw some of the encampment activity underneath the 101 freeway, spanning from 2nd Street all the way up to north of Mission, which is a significant amount of space because they are commuter parking lots, which are managed by Caltrans, which is under the jurisdiction of the state of California. We had a lot of people asking us, how come you're not doing anything? And because of Martin versus Boise, we could not do anything. And it was also Caltrans jurisdiction. So it would be up to the state, which would therefore be California Highway Patrol, to enforce any type of movement. But because of Martin versus Boise, the state wasn't going to do that. So as the encampment grew, we were in talks with Caltrans throughout the pandemic. And they told us, they gave us a deadline that they were going to come in and clean out all of those commuter lots, therefore displacing about 50 people who were in the encampments. So we worked with Caltrans and came up with a solution, which was to clear out all of those lots. The private businesses that were still functioning and needed parking, we could fence off the lots and decrease the spaces available to simply what those businesses needed. And then we would fence the lots off, and San Rafael would be able to create what we call the service support area, which is underneath the 101 freeway between Fifth Avenue and Mission Avenue, bounded on the east-west by Heatherton and Irwin. And as you see here in this picture, this was pretty early on when we set up the service support area. We call it a grand experiment because we had never done anything like this before. And the goal of the service support area is just that. It was to connect people to services. It was never meant to be a permanent solution. It is really transitional for those folks who are going to be displaced by Caltrans closing down those lots. So we went to Costco and bought these Coleman 6-person tents and ordered cots and sleeping bags from Amazon. And our Department of Public Works went into the lot and painted squares 15 by 18 feet and numbered each of the squares to be used by individuals who wanted to move into the site. So we were really not sure how this was going to go over. And our deadline was July 6th. Caltrans was coming in with bulldozers and dump trucks, and they were going to clean out on July 6th. And we gave advance notice. We let everybody know that this was happening, but we had an alternative for them, which was to come into the service support area. So the week before the Caltrans cleanup, we started to move people in. And to our surprise, about half of the people moved into the site. So it was about 24 people that moved in before the official cleanup. We didn't think that many people would take us up on the offer so quickly. So come July 6th, almost everybody who was displaced then moved into the service support area. And within that week, we were full. So we were up to 48 people in the service support area within days of that Caltrans cleanup. We quickly found that the demand was much greater than the supply, so we created a wait list. And we currently have a wait list of 16 people. And I just have to give a shout out to the man in the picture. He's a member of Community Action Marin's care team, and he's one of the service providers who's in the service support area on a regular basis, helping people get connected to services. One of the things that people expressed to us before we opened up the site was that if they were going to move in, they wanted to feel safe. And many of the women said that they would like to have security there. So the city of San Rafael is paying Barbier Security for 24/7 security, not to keep people in, because people can come and go at will. There is no curfew. But if you do not have a tent in the area, you are not allowed inside. You're welcome. Those people can visit with folks outside, of the site, but it was really paramount that this be a place where people feel safe and where their property would be safe as well. As you can see on the sign, we provide restrooms, hand washing stations. We have charging outlets so people can keep their phones charged and laptops, any type of technology. We also do have garbage pickup twice a week. And we have, oh, next slide, please. A beautiful office. One of the things that we found is that when you have an area where people are, like during Project Room Key, we were housing people at double the rate that we had been housing them pre-COVID because case managers could find their clients. So we put in this mobile trailer to serve as an office. So any service providers could come in, meet with their client in the privacy of an air-conditioned, quiet office to do paperwork. And just to feel like they were being treated with dignity and respect. And this was not part of the original plan, but we just, as you know, the weeks went by, we were learning, okay, this would actually be quite beneficial. Next slide, please. Pets are allowed in the site, and they actually created another way for us to connect with people. Next slide. Which is, we had I guess I didn't put it in here, but we had Marin Humane come down to the service area, and a veterinarian with a private practice volunteered their time for a whole day and did vaccinations, minor medical treatment, like treating hot spots, trimming nails, free licensing, and all of this was done free. The reason why this is so important, not just the veterinary services, but providing folks with the opportunities to engage with outside providers, it builds trust in the system. So somebody that might be more isolative and not willing to really engage or connect with an outreach provider, this is a great example of building trust with that client and saying, we really do care about you. We want to help you. And whatever we need to do to support you, get you connected to services, and ultimately get you connected with housing, we're here to do that. Here we have our Downtown Streets team, which is an incredible program that Andrew used to run before he moved on to the city of San Rafael. They're in there once a week doing cleanups, and they're also doing outreach as well. It is an employment program. So it gives people who are in the site the chance to talk to the team and say, hey, what is this about? What do you get? And how do I join? So we've had a couple of people join the team from the site because of their outreach doing cleanup. Next slide. Oh, that's my last slide. So this, in summary, the service support area is really, this is our opportunity to engage with people in a pretty intensive way. And bringing in outside providers, which Katie is going to get to in just a moment, has been a really integral piece of this. And it's been a really wonderful experience to see people get their housing vouchers from being in the service support area and see them move from living in a tent to living in their own apartment. It's pretty awesome. And Katie's going to talk about the outreach that she supervises at St. Vincent de Paul. Katie.
Hello. I just wanted to kind of do a little wraparound of the different case models, the case management models we have here in the county. And St. Vincent's is one of the programs that has case management, but we also have the Downtown Streets team, which manages folks that are in housing, as well as the Ritter Center, Homeward Bound. And what's really remarkable about what we all do is that we are outreaching to people out in the community. And actually the guy that you're looking at right now, that's Jeff Helvig. He's one of our top case managers. And what they do is go out and meet clients where they are. Sometimes it's in the service area, but often it's out in the encampments, it's on the street, it might be in a park, it might be, going out to West Marin somewhere and outreaching to someone. And these case managers from all the different teams and agencies are really skilled at building rapport and trust. Part of being chronically homeless is that you've kind of been worked around a system where it's hard to access services. So, Andrew pointed that out, that, people have a multitude of issues and problems that may be substance use and mental health. And the old model was to get that fixed before we put you into housing. And now we're looking at housing as the first entry point, and then linking people to those services when they feel like they have a safe place to be and a safe place to explore those options. And so I'll talk a little bit more. I won't say much about the other teams, but I want to talk about the homeless outreach team. What we specifically do is go out and work with people that have been called decliners. And decliners are people that have been homeless a really long time, have mistrust with the legal system. They don't know that there's housing available to them. They often have been in and out of jails, psychiatric units, beaten up on the streets by their own peers. And so these are the folks that have the highest rate of mistrust, I would say. And so these are folks that we outreach to, and Jeff is a good example of doing this work. Meeting with somebody, bringing them a cup of coffee, bringing them a cell phone so that they can communicate with us. Really basic needs. When you think about the challenges to finding housing if you're homeless, you're on the street, you have no vehicle often, no money, you don't have documents. Often many of our folks have either lost or have been robbed, and they don't have these basic functioning skills and documents they need to get housing. So someone like Jeff might meet with somebody out in the community, and after meeting with them 3 or 4 weeks, finally the person says, yeah, maybe I'm interested in some housing, but I don't have a social security card. I don't have an ID. I don't have any income. What do I do? And so our case managers, and I believe this is true of all the case management teams, go out and make this happen. We pick up clients, we take them to DMV, we get them notarized birth certificates, everything that they have, everything that they need to get into housing and to get on general assistance and Medi-Cal and to get the support that they need. We do that with them. And then once they have applied for a voucher, we do that process with them too. It's almost 100% hand holding. It's driving someone to get their fingerprints. It's filling out the application with them, meeting with them 2 to 3 times a week, just to build that rapport. And so what does this do for our clients when they get into housing is that having a support system and supportive case management really helps folks be able to stay in their housing. Some of the behaviors that they might have had living homeless can put their housing at risk. And so case managers are meeting with them frequently, talking with them about how they're doing, how are they transitioning from, no rules and being out in the streets or being out in an encampment and doing whatever they'd like, to now living in a structured system. And so we're able to keep that retention very high in housing because we're engaging with people regularly on a weekly basis, and sometimes more often than that. We have 3 intensive case managers that go out and are targeting these difficult to engage clients, as well as homeless vets. These are folks that have very high vulnerability scores and would not, probably do well on their own or ever be able to access housing on their own. And I think that, you know, one of the other things that we're doing now is we're starting an enrichment program. So for folks that are already housed through this continuum of care, we're bringing on board a peer enrichment manager, and she is a professional peer that has been working and doing outreach into the community. And she'll be coming in and working with all the different agency clients who are housed to identify barriers to wellness for them. And some of that is that you can imagine we all have things that we like to do in life. We love music, we love dance, arts, things like that. Well, when you're homeless, you're in a path to survival. It's just day-to-day survival. And so what we do is once somebody is housed, we go in and work with them to try to identify what did they give up that brought them joy and a lot of passion or happiness in life. Because we believe that it's not just housing someone, it's giving them some meaning in life, you know, things that bring them joy. And so working with a case manager alongside of an enrichment manager assists people to move on, to start to build back things in their lives that they love, like school, work. And if you've been homeless a long time, it takes that transition really needs a lot of hand holding. So I think that's pretty much what we're doing in the case management model in our different agencies. And I'm going to turn it back to, I think it's Andrew.
And I'm actually going to quickly turn it over to Ashley. But yes, who's going to describe some of how our efforts to expand the service support.
Ashley, your sound seems to be off. Might need to unmute and mute yourself.
Still off.
No, still not getting sound.
All right, can you hear me now by chance?
Perfect.
Yes.
It's a little bit
Okay.
low, but yes.
Okay, I will try to speak up. That's a little bit odd that my microphone is not working. My apologies. So we're really excited to announce a new case management initiative funded jointly by the County of Marin and all of the incorporated cities here in the county. The effort is to provide housing case management to people who are high utilizers of city services. So that's things like a lot of EMS transports or police contacts with DPW, for example, fire department contacts, people who are taking up a lot of city resources. These are folks who typically have been homeless for a long time, who are chronically homeless, who are very high needs, who may not have so much of the medical fragility that many of the folks who we have successfully housed in recent years have, but have a lot of other high needs as well. So the way, what's particularly exciting about this program is that the way housing resources, most of our housing resources in Marin are allocated, they're allocated to people who are the most vulnerable, but folks who are who have case management services, whether that's through a county program like Whole Person Care or behavioral health and recovery services. Those are the folks who are pulled in order of their vulnerability for a housing voucher, permanent housing voucher. And the new case management program that's being funded with in partnership with the cities is going to give another batch of folks access to those case management and housing resources. So effectively a new permanent supportive housing that we're thrilled to have this opportunity. Next slide. And actually, so I'm going to talk about HomeKey 1.0, but I'm going to start by speaking a little bit about Project RoomKey, which you may be familiar with. When the pandemic began, the state immediately launched an initiative to bring vulnerable homeless people inside
and we used hotel and motel rooms to create non-congregate shelters. So as you might imagine, a congregate shelter facility in the time of COVID is not the safest. Lots of people in dormitory type settings, living there with or without masks, sleeping without masks off. So we increased our non-congregate shelter capacity in response to COVID-19. Across the state, we served 22,000 individuals, 55 of California counties and 3 tribes participated. It was a very significant initiative. Here in Marin, we operated a variety of motels throughout 2020 and through much of 2021. And we are working to locate permanent housing for the remaining Project Roomkey participants. Next slide. So Project Homekey, as related to Project Roomkey, as you might imagine from the names, the state remains not the most creative in its naming schemes. The Project Homekey came about because the state sort of realized, we've got all these folks inside in response to the pandemic, but what we really need is permanent housing for these folks. We can't just place people in interim housing and then exit them from interim housing with no permanent options created and call it a day. So Project Homekey 1.0, which was in 2020, was $750 million. It was a wild timeline. It was announced in June. The notice of funding availability, which launched the applications, was mid-July, and applications were due less than a month later. We had to have the all properties statewide had to be had an escrow closed by 12/31, which actually meant that the state told us that we had to be closed by early November on our properties, and then operational, actually half occupied within 90 days of close of escrow. And as you might imagine, some of these units actually require some rehab. So that was a wild timeline. It was hotels, motels, other sorts of commercial non-housing buildings being converted into either interim or permanent housing, or interim housing that would then become permanent housing. Statewide, Project Homekey 1.0 served about 6,000, created about 6,000 new permanent housing units and served about 8,200 people. Here in Marin, we acquired 2 properties through Project Homekey 1.0. 3301 Kerner is going to be a 44-unit permanent supportive housing project, primarily targeting people who have serious mental illness. Right now, it is operating as the home of the Mill Street Center Emergency Shelter, which is currently undergoing redevelopment, which will reopen next year. 3301 Kerner will begin redevelopment into permanent supportive housing when Mill Street reopens and the residents of the emergency shelter are relocated to their new facility. The Casa Buena is the other facility. Please ignore the sign that says the Inner Marin at Corte Madera. We're calling it Casa Buena. That sign will not always be there. This is an 18-unit motel in Corte Madera, newly refurbished actually when we closed on the property, which is wonderful. It's actually, it's lovely. It's really nice inside. We've opened, because of the 90-day occupancy requirements, we opened this facility as interim housing and have targeted folks who are on a path to housing already for residents of this facility. So it's folks who have a voucher or who have been authorized to apply for a voucher, who are searching for a unit and need someplace to stabilize, to be indoors, so they can take a shower before they become a landlord, that kind of thing. And then this property is going to close as interim housing at the end of October of this year and begin redevelopment to add kitchenettes to each unit. So each unit will be a small little studio apartment for people who are chronically homeless, and we're targeting to reopen that facility as permanent supportive housing in March of next year. Which leads me to Project Homekey 2.0. The Project Homekey 1.0 was such a smashing success that the state is doing it again with a lot more money. This year, we've got $1.4 billion. And in the next fiscal year, we anticipate another $1.35 billion. There's a $200 million set aside for the Bay Area specifically. And Marin, of course, is part of the Bay Area, so we're competing against San Francisco, Contra Costa, Alameda, Santa Clara for our project Home Key 2.0 resources. The notice of funding availability is out for this project or for this program, but applications don't open until next week. We will be submitting an application probably mid to late October. And it's more or less the same guidelines as Project Home Key 1.0. So the state is picking up probably 2/3 of the tab of the cost of acquisition and rehab for the property. And the local jurisdiction, foundations, other private funders need to pick up the remainder. We are applying, it's cities and counties, housing authorities are all authorized applicants. It's very flexible. It has to be, funds have to be spent within 8 months, and you have to be occupied within 90 days of the rehabilitation of the property being completed. We do have a year to complete the rehab before we have to occupy, which is great, which means we can actually refurbish into permanent housing before we operate and skip that interim housing step. We are working with Episcopal Community Services as our development sponsor for this project. Episcopal Community Services will be the actual property owner and the operator. They'll run the construction and all of those things at the sites that we apply for, but the county is an active partner as required by the Home Key legislation. Episcopal Community Services is a new partner to Marin, and we're extremely lucky to have them here. They pioneered permanent supportive housing in San Francisco 30 years ago. They opened the first one. They now operate 1,600 permanent supportive housing beds in San Francisco in a variety of different kinds of settings, and they have an absolutely enormous client retention rate. It's about 98% of people maintain stable housing in their programs. They were San Francisco's development sponsor in Project Home Key 1.0, and we're thrilled to have them on board this year. You may have seen a press release go out earlier this week announcing that we will be applying for 1251 South Alicio in Larkspur for Project Home Key 2.0. This is a former skilled nursing facility. If you have a dentist or a medical specialist in Marin, you may have driven past this building. It has been vacant for a long time. It's a little bit of a community eyesore, broken windows, that sort of thing. And there's a coffee coffee van parked in the parking lot. It's right around the corner from Marin General. It's a lovely setting right on the water. Lots of apartments nearby. It's close to transits and local amenities. There's a little park next door. And it will be 43 new permanent supportive housing units, which will apply to the city of Larkspur's regional housing needs allocation number. So that's a requirement of the number of new housing units that each jurisdiction needs to create, and that'll apply for that. And I think we're going to finish off by just showing you a little bit about the launch of the Casa Buena project and how successful that's been. We've worked very closely with the community in Corte Madera to make that project a success, and we're really proud of what we've done.
On behalf of Corte Madera's elected officials, staff, and residents, I'd like to welcome you to the Casa Buena, Corte Madera's first permanent supportive housing for those that experience homelessness. This was all brought together by a collaborative effort that included the County of Marin, Catholic Charities, Open Door Marin, town staff, and Corte Madera residents, who are also providing monetary and in-kind donations.
Marin has worked very hard over the past 3 years to address our homeless population. And with the Home Key project in Corte Madera at Casa Buena, we will be able to provide needed housing for 18 of our most vulnerable residents while wrapping all the services the county has to offer around them. I want to thank the community of Corte Madera, their city council, and the Casa Buena Steering Committee for working with the county to make this possible.
When I first heard of plans to build a homeless shelter in Corte Madera, I was very much opposed to it. It wasn't until I did a bunch of research on my own that I began to realize that permanent supportive housing can be an important solution to the homeless issue we have here in Marin County.
A safe home helps transform lives and creates essential stability, healing, independence, and dignity founded on hope. Our partnership with Marin County through Project Room Key and Home Key impacts many lives. Together, we strive to end homelessness in Marin.
From Corte Madera to Novato, Larkspur to Inverness, we have successfully housed hundreds of our community's most vulnerable chronically homeless people. Because of projects like this and the support of community members like you, I know we can reach our goal of being the first county in the Bay Area to end chronic homelessness.
One of the ideas we had was to create welcome baskets that could be given to each new resident when they move in. So we sent people shopping for everything from toothpaste to shampoo to snacks, cozy slippers, and grocery store gift cards. And the response from the community was frankly overwhelming. So many people wanted to be a part of this. It really embodies the spirit of Corte Madera as a welcoming place.
So on behalf of Corte Madera, I'd like to welcome our newest residents.
Welcome to Corte Madera!
So that concludes our presentation. I did just want to wrap up and summarize something briefly, because it really is quite amazing. Taking what Lynn talked about, Paul, Ashley, Katie, if you think about what's on the pipeline, looking forward the next 12 months or 2 years, we've got 32 new units becoming available at Mill Street, 62 new units through the Home Key 1 efforts, hopefully at least 43 more units through Home Key 2. We've got the new case management, which should be 68 additional units. And then, as Lynn described, we found a place for services and connection for unsheltered folks for almost 50 people in San Rafael. So it really has been, when you add it all up, pretty amazing. There's certainly work to be done, and we can talk about that, and hopefully, preventing a wave of more homelessness in our community. But I think our partners have really stepped up and are doing everything they can to try to help get people back inside. So with that, we're going to turn it over to you for questions. And I did just want to add here, if anyone has questions or comments that you don't feel comfortable asking today, or you want to send later if we run out of time, feel free to send an email to me, Andrew@openingdoors.org. And actually, I realize this is a typo, openingdoorsmarin.org. So again, openingdoorsmarin.org. And I'll be happy to either field your question or get you to the right person. So with that, I have not been able to see the questions or chat. I think my colleagues have. So I think Ashley's going to help Q&A and maybe direct questions that have come in so far to who the best person is to answer them.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm back, and I'll be taking the questions that we've received from the Q&A tab and bringing them to everyone's attention here, and then we'll let the panel have at it. So let me just jump in. Before I ask the first question, I'll just remind everyone that we do not fact check questions. These are your questions that come directly from the audience, and I'm just the mouthpiece reading those into the speakers, and so they'll handle them as they see fit. The first question from Kevin Haggerty: the California eviction moratorium is scheduled to expire on September 30th. What effect do you think that will have on homelessness in Marin? And does the homelessness team have any plans to deal with the situation? And this question, and I think all the other questions that will follow, are really to the entire panel. So whoever wants to jump in.
I'll start for this one. During the pandemic, Marin has actually rolled out millions of dollars in rental assistance to prevent evictions among people who have lost income due to COVID-19. So we have thus far prevented many evictions across Marin County. And we are continuing to roll out those funds going forward. We still have quite a lot of those funds to issue, though our teams are moving as swiftly as possible. Rolling out the funds has been actually somewhat of a Herculean effort on the part of our service providers, making phone calls to folks in late evening hours after they're off work, and really going all out to help prevent as many people from becoming homeless as possible. We are hopeful that we will continue to have enough funds and be able to roll them out to the most vulnerable folks in the community to prevent a large wave of homelessness hitting us. We do, however, have resources dedicated to folks who do become homeless. We have resources for folks who are new to homelessness or maybe have been homeless for a little while but don't require the permanent housing subsidy and the long-term support services that are associated with permanent supportive housing. So we have St. Vincent de Paul, for example, operates quite a lot of those resources, and as well as Ritter Center, Adopt a Family, North American Community Services. There's agencies across the county that are implementing emergency supports.
Okay, any other comments? If not, I'll move on. We have a question from Greg Nell. I'll just read it in, and then if anyone wants to make observations about some of the premises, you can. Homelessness is a national issue. We know advocates portray our homeless as homegrown, which is important to build local support. However, a significant number of our homeless do come from, quote, red states who do not offer services and actively promote a move along strategy and even bus people to other states, as Nevada was caught doing. They may have been here for 10 years, but they're essentially refugees from those cities and states. So while we are housing more homeless than ever in our history, it's like filling a bucket with a hole in it. We have more than ever on our streets, and we know many of them are traveling here for the weather and the benefits. What is being done to create a national policy which would share the responsibility and solutions with all states?
I'll take this one. In fact, I really enjoy having the opportunity to address this, because I think a lot of folks in Marin believe this myth that people come here because the services are so wonderful. And I can speak from my own personal experience, but also speak from what the data has shown. 73% of people who are experiencing homelessness in our 2019 point in time count were from Marin. And another 9%, only 9% of the people who were counted in that 2019 point in time count became homeless outside of California. So, and I can tell you just from my experience being on the street almost every day and hearing the stories from folks who are living on the streets, they grew up here. They are homeless in Marin because this is their home. And I wish that more people could hear the stories that I hear of people who went to Tama High School, went to Drake High School, graduated, come from families their families still live here in Marin. The notion that people, they hear about services and they flock here is simply not true. There is a portion of the population that is truly transient. And those are the folks who sort of, they're not settling into a place, but they have their backpacks and they oftentimes are hitchhiking or taking buses. But those folks don't plant themselves in the community. They might be here for a few weeks, but then they move on. Our chronically homeless population are people that they might be your neighbor's kids or somebody that you grew up with. There was a former police officer here who grew up in San Anselmo, and he was a cop here for 30 years, and he did incredible work, and he knew a great portion of our homeless population because he grew up with them and went to high school. And people don't want to leave here because this is their home. And yes, we do provide services, but I don't think that people are, coming from out of state because of the wonderful work that we are doing. And I have never seen a bus dropping off individuals from another state, just for what that is worth. And again, I'm speaking just from my own experience, but I have been doing this for 8 years, and I'm on the street pretty much every day. So, and I like to pride myself on getting to know every single person who is experiencing homelessness in San Rafael.
I just want to chime in too. I've been a resident since 1969 and have run the crisis residential programs and worked at Buccleuch and St. Vincent for I've been working in this county for 30 years, and the majority of my clients were people I either went to high school with or knew as well. So I just want to confirm that what the same police officer also experienced is that folks are from here, their families are often disengaged, and there's lots of fragmented relationships. And so they are locals.
Very good, thank you. Let me move on to a question from Bill Hale. Bill is referencing ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, which recently issued a proposed minimum housing development target for each region in the Bay Area. And Bill's question is, do ABAG's numbers of needed housing include estimates for the homeless?
I can take a crack at that one. I do not believe that ABAG's estimate includes specific call outs for homelessness or permanent supportive housing, for example. But what we find is that within the ABAG and for folks, that basically the way the affordability is determined is that you look at area median income and then a percentage of that based on someone's earnings. So extremely low income is basically 30% of AMI or less. And so the vast majority of the folks that we work with, in fact, most people just that have a minimum wage job in Marin County are ELI. So I think the intention is that—
Tell us those acronyms. I'm sorry, Andrew.
Oh, the ELI is the extremely low income. Yeah. So, being what it is, I think, even just the minimum wage in our community is not a living wage. So, so I think that band of the housing allocation is meant for people that are extremely low income, that are the most likely to become homeless. And I think just kind of piggybacking on what Lynn and Katie were saying, across the Bay Area, we find that actually most people, when they identify why did they become homeless, it was an economic reason. It was a rent increase. It was a job loss. It was an eviction. And so that kind of ELI percentage, that extremely low income percentage, is of major concern. And there is a regional group now called All Home that is trying to bring more awareness to this. And their projection is, I think it's something like there are about 1 million ELI households in the Bay Area. So if you think about that for a moment, and the economic impact of the pandemic and rising rents and so forth, there are a lot of people, unfortunately, that are at risk of homelessness just based on the economics of the cost of living here.
Okay, let me move on. Alice Fredericks asks, how can we persuade landlords to accept federal Section 8 housing vouchers?
I'm happy to take that one. Actually, one of the sort of silver linings to both COVID and the eviction moratorium has been that, well, there's a lot of silver linings to the eviction moratorium, but one of the things from a landlord point of view is that Section 8 vouchers have become ever more appealing because they're guaranteed income, even if somebody loses their job, for the landlord. So we're actually seeing landlords are way more receptive to taking Section 8 than we found in the past. But also, we've done a lot of outreach to landlords as a community, and we found that there are a section who really like using Section 8 because majority of the time it comes with these wraparound services. And when they're renting just to someone in the community at large, they don't know who they're renting to, and if they have questions or like, is this person supposed to be staying there, or who are they, or there's no one they can call, they just deal with their renter. Whereas what we do here is that we're able to support both the client and the landlord to make sure that housing is maintained. So we have a number of landlords who, whenever they have other units open up, they now reach out to us and say, do you have any more folks with a Section 8 voucher? We love serving this population. And also it's a way that folks can really help whilst running their property management business. They get their income, it's guaranteed through the subsidy, and they don't have long periods of vacancy trying to fill the units. So there are some people who don't want to use Section 8, and that's their prerogative, but we're definitely doing a lot of education as to who are we housing. Many of the people we're serving who come from the shelter and then are moving into housing, they're folks who work at Starbucks, for example. They're serving people coffee every day, but because the amount they get paid, they can't afford to live anywhere in Marin. And so when landlords get to know some of the people who are living in their units with Section 8, the kind of myth they had in their head, I thought it was this, but actually it's this person who is working in my community, is part of my community, went to school here. Oh yeah, of course I want to help that person. So the more we tell the stories of everybody has their own journey, the more landlords are engaged.
And I'd just like to add quickly, Marin County funds a landlord partnership program through Marin Housing Authority that can pay vacancy payments, damages, deposits. There's a 24/7 phone number that landlords can call if there's an emergency, and that's been really helpful as well.
Very good. One of our viewers asks, what kind of things can volunteers do to help the homeless that you serve?
Hi, I'll answer that. There's a number of agencies, St. Vincent de Paul, Homeward Bound, we all have different criteria for volunteers. So I don't know that for everyone. And right now with COVID, we are being somewhat conservative in terms of how we use volunteers. I would really urge you to go to the websites of Homeward Bound of Marin, Ritter Center, St. Vincent de Paul, and Downtown Streets team, and look at volunteer opportunities. Most of them have some type of blurb on their website that you can find out. We love volunteers, and it also means that there's training that needs to go into it. We're dealing with a very vulnerable and sensitive population, so we have to be careful about confidentiality and things like that. So go to each of those agencies and check them out and see. And there's also the Volunteer Center of Marin that you can look at. And even doing smaller things that don't directly impact somebody one-to-one has a larger effect on the group and as a whole. So we do love volunteers.
Great. I'm going to keep going, at least for a few more minutes. We have some more questions, so let me just keep jumping in. Josh Labresco asks, there is no doubt that all of this is a big win from a humanitarian perspective. Have you been able to calculate the benefits from a financial perspective? I am thinking of the costs of housing relative to decreased healthcare costs, decreased crime, increased employment, and so on.
Sure, I can jump in super quick here. A few years ago, Santa Clara County did a cost study of homelessness where they looked at the costs incurred, all those things that you just mentioned, for people being chronically homeless on the streets, and then they compared that to the cost of keeping somebody in permanent supportive housing for a year. And they found that leaving somebody chronically homeless on the streets costs the community about $65,000 annually, while putting them in a permanent unit with support services costs about $25,000 annually. So according to Santa Clara County, it's about a $40,000 per person savings per year.
Okay, you had that answer. Linda Jackson asks, what efforts are being done to help older people who become homeless for the first time, such as loss of a spouse or unable to afford the rent anymore? How do you help older people with cognitive decline who are homeless?
I can start that, and then I'm happy to have anybody else jump in. I do know that of the people we've housed, in the big number, we're approaching 400 people, that 35% of them have been 61 or older. So we are serving a lot of seniors in the homeless population. And I can say from personal experience, I've been at Homeward Bound for 16 years. And when I started, the average age of somebody in the shelter was in their 40s to 50s. Now we're seeing the average age is closer to 60 years old. So there are a lot more people who are either approaching, being officially a senior, or because of the years they spent on the street, even in their late 50s, maybe have a street age and much older because of the health issues of being homeless for so long. So I appreciate the question and take it very seriously. There's a lot of folks who've seniors who are experiencing homelessness, whether it's for the first time or for a number of years. It is a challenge. We're trying to respond. We have a few programs that are just senior focused, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward. Where the question about how do you help older people with cognitive decline who are homeless, that is something our system has really struggled with, and we do need some programs to assess that. We haven't figured that out, and it's an issue we see. Like, it really is, like, without the sort of skilled nursing facility that's really designed for folks who don't have good insurance because they're homeless and can't afford the costs of like a boarding care facility. It is a challenge. I see Katie raising her hand, so I'm going to tag team to you.
Yeah, thank you. It brought up an example. I'm actually taking a woman who's almost 70 to sign a lease today. And she was somebody who was in the hospital. We got a call about her. She had lost her housing because she had been in the hospital for 4 months and hadn't paid rent, and couldn't afford it. Some of her hospital premiums were what she was paying. So we were able to get her an emergency housing voucher. And she definitely had some declining of her cognitive skills. But what we found was that when we got her into a senior community that was low income with her voucher, and there's a lot of support there. And what we find is that when people are placed appropriately in housing programs or in communities of like-minded people like seniors, they tend to make friends, they tend to get together and socialize more. Their cognitive abilities get better because they're practicing those skills of communicating and not isolating and being with others. And then we also continue to do the wraparound case management so that, if they can't track it for themselves, when their annual recertification is due, or they can't remember when their doctor's appointment is, we can work with them around that and get them some enhanced case management.
And I'll just add, completely agreeing with everything Colin just said. I'll mention this is something that we have struggled with, particularly people who have more advanced cognitive decline. That's a problem that every community across the country is having, how to help homeless seniors with cognitive decline. Nobody has a good answer for it yet. And a lot of really smart people are working hard to try and figure something out.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then wrap it up. We're approaching 1:30, and I know some of the panel may have to jump off. So if you do, don't hesitate. We know you have other obligations. And I want to thank each of you, if you're not here at the very end, for the time that you've invested in bringing us up to date on this important issue. I'd like to see if there's, I feel like Anderson Cooper, we have 30 seconds left. Give me the story of your life. I'm going to present a pretty big topic here that could be its own subject for a separate presentation, I think. But I'm curious, and I'd just like to see if there's any quick response we get on this. The thing that strikes me in listening to each of you today is how complex the system is that is addressing this population. We've got state funding, county government oversight. We've got effort by local officials in cities and the county, law enforcement, private charitable organizations. It clearly takes a village to get this job done, or perhaps more, to tackle the problems that are faced by this portion of our community. So I guess the question is, does this network system work in your views? And if not, is there a better way to organize this effort to get it all done? As I say, this is probably too large a question for the time that we have remaining, but if anybody wants to jump in and give a couple of thoughts, I'd be appreciative.
If I can go quickly, because I do have to be on another Zoom at 1:30 and it's 1:30, but I'll just say quickly, I think the network approach is the only way to solve this issue, because the people we're serving are equally complex with different layers of issues and different responses needed. Some people need permanent, supportive, subsidized housing forever because they have so many complex cognitive issues. Others people need a little support, maybe assistance while they re-find a job and reinvent themselves because and they're able to go back on their own. So we need different responses for different people. And I think we've seen through our partnership with the Built for Zero network that the best approach to solving homelessness is to look at people one person at a time on a by name list. It's hard when you have a lot of people, but it's been really effective. And we do this across our system, but I work closely with the veterans group. And we've seen that we've dropped our number of homeless veterans in Marin from 100. Right now we're hovering around 31 homeless veterans in Marin. And I'm not going to tell you because of confidentiality, but I could tell you the name of every single one. I could tell you which ones are on a housing path, which ones are not. And the people who are not, we're then trying to find, well, how do we support them to get them into housing? What else, are they eligible for a senior affordable housing list? And can we sign them up for that? Do they have complex mental health issues? Can we get them the wraparound support that then will help them qualify for housing? So looking at a person one at a time and seeing how they fit in a complex system, it really does work. And then that is really borrowed from a best practice national model. The communities who have ended veteran and chronic homelessness have taken this by name list, person by person approach. And I'm sorry, I have to jump. I'm sure we could talk more on that. So it looks like Ashley's ready. So I'm going to tag to you and thank you for listening today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I'll just add that the networked approach is the only thing that works. Our system did not work until we started partnering together. And it does make our calendars look nightmarish. I would shudder to show you a screenshot of my calendar this week. We're in meetings all the time, including basically at all of our homeless services agencies at the executive director, deputy director, program director level meet for 2 hours every Thursday morning without fail. We work together so closely, and it's the proof is in the pudding. Between 2017 and 2019, which was the last year that we have a full point in time count, a full homeless census in Marin because of the pandemic, we saw a 28% decrease in chronic homelessness, and we were the only Bay Area county to see a significant decrease. What we're doing actually does work.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to have to wrap it here. I wish we had more time. We could have spent another hour clearly. I want to thank our panel for the excellent presentation, for edifying each and every one of us, and for giving us your time to bring these insights to our audience. I want to thank the audience as well for tuning in, for caring enough to watch this program, and for your questions. Today's program, I want to remind everyone, is going to be on our website. We have recorded this, and it will be available indefinitely on our webpage under the archives page. We encourage you to, if you missed any of this, check it out on the web, and certainly send that link to others that you know that were not able to attend today, and they can get the benefit of the full program on our website. That's why we do that. I want to thank our webmaster, Alan Shavitz, for another absolutely flawless presentation, and to our program chair, Kevin Haggerty, for putting this program together today. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our panel, and we hope to see you all next month.